Shalom uvracha from Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. With the help of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we studied this evening in our continued series of studies of the ethics of the fathers. We're studying this evening chapter 2, Mishnah 7, Perek Bet, Mishnah Zayin. I would like to introduce my presentation this evening with a comment that I find that perhaps the most difficult Mishnah for me, the most difficult Mishnah in Pirkei Avot is maybe the Mishnah that we're studying this evening. I tried to review many of the commentaries and sources. I don't feel proficient in really trying to explain the intricacies of this Mishnah. There's something mysterious about this Mishnah. It doesn't fit into the flow of Pirkei Avot. I'll try to discuss some of the issues that need to be dealt with, but I just want to point out that I really believe that a major work should be dedicated to just trying to explain this one Mishnah. The Mishnah is actually a story about the teacher that we've been learning about, the Rav, the Tana that we've been studying about for many weeks, one of the most famous of the Rabbanim of the period of the Mishnah, Hillel. And the story is told about how he sees a certain skull floating on the water. Very unusual story. Afu, Perek Bet Mishnah Zayin. Afu, Hillel also, the word also needs clarification because there doesn't seem to be any previous story about Hillel in our text. How does the Mishnah begin with the word af? Afu, Hillel also, in addition to all the teachings, that we've studied till now, it once happened that Hillel ra'a gulgolet achat shetzafa al pnei hamayim. He sees the skull of an individual, someone's skull that's floating on the face of the water. Amar la, and he addresses the skull and he says, as a result of the fact that you drowned others, that's why you were drowned. Al da'ateft atfuch. It's not just happenstance. Since you were responsible for the death of others in this particular way of drowning them, therefore you were drowned. V'sof, and eventually, not only will you drown, but those that drowned you will also be drowned. V'sof mitayefayich yitufun. V'sof mitayefayich yitufun. And eventually the end will be that those that drowned you will also be drowned. And this Mishnah is really very, very difficult. At least very difficult for me. It appears at least one other time in a major Talmudic source. It appears in Masechet Sukkah, in Tractate Sukkah. There's a Baraita that quotes the story, page 53a of Sukkah. There, in context of Masechet Sukkah, it's speaking about the teachings of Hillel at the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. There was a special celebration on the holiday of Sukkot where they celebrated the libation of water on the altar. They had a whole ceremony of gathering the water, preparing the special waters for libation. And the Gemara says that Simchat Beit HaShoeva was one of the highest moments of celebration in the Jewish community for the entire year. The rabbis quote the teachings of Hillel at that celebration, and then it says af, and also afuru, the same words as our Mishnah. Afuru agu golat achat, etc. Afhura agugol tachat shetzafa al pnei hamayim amar la al datef tatfuch besof v'taifai chitufan. I don't exactly know what the connection is between Hillel's teachings and celebration at the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, at the great celebrations of Sukkot, and the teaching of Hillel. I don't think it's just juxtaposed for no reason. I mean, he has many teachings. If they want to quote teachings of Hillel, there's a very large selection of teachings. What exactly is the connection between his teachings at Simchat Beit HaShoeva and the story about him seeing the skull? I have a great teacher, a great Torah teacher, one of the greatest people involved in bringing our people closer and closer to God and to Torah and Mitzvot. One of my closest friends, his name is Rabbi Zell Newman, currently in Toronto, Bezrat Hashem, on the way to Yerushalayim, I hope, with his whole mishpacha, happily and healthily. We need him in Yerushalayim. He told me, well, maybe Simchat Beit HaShoeva has something to do with water. It's a celebration of water. So the immediate association that he made is, well, there's two teachings here dealing with water. There's the Simchat Beit HaShoeva teaching of Hillel with water, and then there's the story of Hillel with water. He also, not only did he speak at a water ceremony, but he even saw something of it. That could be. But I'm so troubled about the story. I was looking for someone to discuss why doesn't Hillel bury the skull? If God forbid someone finds a skull, may all the people be buried, properly. It seems that this person's body, unfortunately, his skull was detached from the rest of his body. If someone, the religious obligation, seemingly, is to take it and to bury it. He's carrying on some kind of conversation here. He speaks to the skull. Rather than speaking to the skull, shouldn't he take the skull and bury it? Now, I was in the library this afternoon, and I looked through many works on Pirkei Avot. Tens of works on Pirkei Avot. Many. We have, Baruch Hashem, available to us, especially here in Yerushalayim, in the National Library. I think it's the biggest Jewish library in the world. I think almost every Jewish book that is ever published is and I was looking, why don't they discuss the question of burial? And I couldn't find even the question. So I thought maybe my question is off if nobody else asked the question. So I must be, So the only answer I could offer, unless someone has something else to say, maybe one of you has something to say. I said that maybe he saw it in the river, he saw it floating, but it was beyond the place that he could reach. It wasn't floating in the shallow parts of the water. It was in the deeper parts of the water, and therefore maybe he was exempt from the obligation of burying it. The commentaries say, how does he know why this person was drowned? I mean, unfortunately, there should never be any death. There should never be any drowning. Every person that drowns is a result of the fact that he or she drowned someone else. Unfortunately, it happened. It should never happen again. But there are stories here in Eretz Yisrael even of people that drowned. Would someone have the nerve? Is it a little audacious to say, "Oh, they know why this person drowned. This person drowned because they drowned others"? Is that a rule? Can someone speak like that? And therefore, in many of the commentaries, we study that it wasn't just a skull. What it says here, Afu Ra'a Gulgolet Achat. Gulgolet Achat. He knew this skull. He identified the personality of this person. And as many of the early commentaries point out, Hillel recognized this skull to be the head, to be the body part of a very wicked person. An individual that was known to him to be a famous murderer, a famous rasha, who was specifically connected to this form of activity. And therefore he wasn't saying this merely speculatively, oh well, since he drowned, therefore he was responsible for the drowning of others. But rather, he associated this gulgolet, he associated this particular skull with the identity of the individual that was known to Hillel to be, unfortunately, involved in murder, to unfortunately be involved in ending people's lives, and especially ending their lives in this particular way. And therefore he felt that it was a time for a very important lesson to teach midah keneged midah, that God's punishment, God metes out punishment, measure for measure, that there are people walking around saying, let din, let dayan, there is no judge, there is no justice, there is no judgment, everything is just arbitrary, and there's no way to see any kind of line of proper aspects of justice prevailing in the world. And Hillel is negating that idea. No, al da'at taft. You, the skull. I don't know. I don't know why he addresses the skull. I would think that even if he wants to speak about the skull, he would speak in third person rather than second person. The way it's written in our Mishnah, and I checked variant readings both on Pirkei Avot, as well as on Masachet Sukkah. I was hoping to find one source that would say that he spoke about the skull. Here it says Amar La. He spoke to the skull. I don't know what that means. He spoke to the skull, especially if you take what I said earlier, that the skull was not even near him. Otherwise, he would bury it. I don't know why the need to speak to the skull. Why doesn't he speak to his students about the skull? Or why doesn't he make this teaching regarding this prayer? Anybody have an answer? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. Why the direct? Anyone? Why the direct discussion with the with the Gulgolet is not known to me.
Reprimanding the skull?
Meaning?
Because you said the skull was
a Russia, yes.
So maybe he's reprimanding him why he was.
That's what it sounds like, right? That's what it sounds like, right? He's like giving Musar or something, right? Like rebuking.
Right, but he's not going to get an answer.
I understand.
He's really not going to know.
I understand that. It's so strange to me that this is Hillel. I'm sorry?
Talking to skull?
That's what it says here. He was addressing his comments.
This is like Shakespeare, Hamlet. The same.
Yeah.
They were obviously moved by Hillel, yes. Yeah. I mean...
The skull answered?
I'm sorry, can you speak louder? They probably want to hear also. What?
The skull is answering in it, or...
There's no. It's a one way.
So maybe it's a Musar, just a Musar.
Yeah, but why second person? That's what I thought also. In other words, so say, this skull was involved, or this person was involved in murderous activity, therefore he was murdered. But why you? Rabbi Yaakov is saying, right, and he wants to address that's correct, he wants to, what?
Yeah, he wants to address the...
He wants to address the assailant. He wants to address the murderer. He wants to address the person. Maybe it's a more direct way of teaching this teaching. Is that acceptable? Amar La, and so you think that maybe there's no way of explaining it. Surely there are many cases where even the greatest minds, even the most phenomenal of minds, cannot explain why certain events take place. And we have this notion of being humble and being careful and making statements when a person sees certain events in the world to come to certain conclusions, especially to speak definitively. One has to be very careful. Except here, perhaps, it was easier because Hillel identified the skull. It's so strange to me. Slicha. It's so strange to me that of all the personalities known to us in the Mishnah, Hillel is this loving individual, right? Hillel is the one who's always speaking about, helping others, and now it is true that he presented the Torah in a synoptic form as that which is despicable to you, do not do to anyone else, which on some level could be akin to what's being said here, right? If you do something to someone else, then it will happen to you. So one can see that perhaps as an extension. You follow what I'm saying? Remember the story about the convert who wants instant Torah on one foot, and he tells him that which is madalach saneh lechavrach lo ta'avid, you know. And it says that which is despicable to you, don't do it to anyone else. Well, it could be, and this is and if a person does do to someone else, maybe Hillel is saying, if a person does do to someone else that which is despicable to them, then eventually it will turn around and it will reach them also. Al datef datfuch, and even those people who drowned you, even if you deserved it, they didn't do it to carry out the justice. They didn't. God arranged that, but even though God arranged it, they too are held responsible for their action. It's so unusual that it's Hillel, though. This Mishnah is extremely, extremely mysterious to me. I would like to share, although I'm not a Kabbalist, and I hesitate to quote Kabbalistic teaching. There is a Kabbalistic teaching connected maybe to Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, maybe earlier. It's discussed in Hasidic writings, in the Lubavitcher Rebbe's, Rabbi Schneerson's comments on Pirkei Avot. He makes mention of this tradition. There is this unusual tradition on this Mishnah that this skull was the skull of Pharaoh, that this was the skull of Paro Melech Mitzrayim, and how the skull of Paro Melech Mitzrayim ends up somewhere in Eretz Yisrael. I don't know. And Hillel saw this. Of course, that would fit because one of the statement that he's making is because you drowned others. Well, drowning others, that's well known to us about Pharaoh. That's his claim to fame, right? Unfortunately, he's the one who's throwing all the babies in the river. He's the one who's torturing the Jewish nation. Al datef datfuch would fit, but how Pharaoh gets here, would that help perhaps in terms of a certain level of understanding of the Mishnah? If we understood the specific personality, the specific identity of the individual, if we learned about Paro, does that help us any more than the Gulgolet Achat? There is the Achat. It says in the book of Shemot, Lo nishar bahem ad echad. The Egyptians who were pursuing the Egyptians who were pursuing the Jewish nation, they were all wiped out on the sea. Ad echad, ad echad. So you could say ad echad means up to and including everyone, or ad echad could mean up to one, but not including that one. And there is some kind of tradition that Pharaoh somehow survives, and maybe that's connected to our discussion. I really don't know. But if it's talking about Paro, then maybe al datef datfuch. You thought you would get away with drowning the Jews? Look where your skull ends up. Look what happened to you. The Gemara says that even though Arba Mitod Beidin, after the destruction of the temple, after the destruction of the Sanhedrin, we don't carry out capital punishment, but God often brings about to the person. And may all people be righteous, and may there never be any need for any form of capital punishment, not directly in Sanhedrin, and not in replacement of the Sanhedrin. The Gemara says that the punishment still exists even beyond the Sanhedrin, and maybe one could fit that into the Mishnah. I'd just like to conclude with the comment I saw in Rashi's commentary on Pirkei Avot, and when I saw it, I felt a little better. Rashi says, I quote, "V'yesh mekomot shelo nahagu lomar zot ha'halacha." Very strange comment. He writes his comment on our Mishnah. He says, "Yesh mekomot." There are places that when they were reciting Pirkei Avot, this would not be part of their recital. It's very interesting. Several aspects of this Rashi are fascinating to me. First of all, Shalom Nagu Lomar. It sounds like as if it was a recital, right? We have recitals of Pirkei Avot. This is an early source. Shalom Nagu Lomar. They would say it, but they wouldn't say this particular part. I didn't discuss that this is in Aramaic, correct? The predominant language, with very few exceptions, of Pirkei Avot is Hebrew, of course, as almost the entirety of the Mishnah. Why is he speaking in why is he speaking in Aramaic? Hillel himself came from Bavel, where the Aramaic was his mother tongue, or maybe the people in Eretz Yisrael spoke more Aramaic than Hebrew, and since he was speaking, especially to this kind of person, he would speak in the vernacular rather than speak in Hebrew. Maybe that's part of what's being said here. This is fascinating to me. Rashi calls it a halacha. I don't know why it's called a halacha. Maybe in the Yerushalmi, you have perek so and so halacha. Each Mishnah is maybe halacha. Yesh mikomot shelo nahagu lomar zot halacha. There are places where they do not read this. I was looking. Is there any reading of? Is there any manuscript of the Pirkei Avot that does not have this in it? I couldn't find. I can't tell you. I went through all the manuscripts. I looked for. Is there any edition of Pirkei Avot that we have that does not have Mishnah Zayin, does not have Mishnah 7? I couldn't find it. So that's that. Rashi doesn't say Veyesh she'ein gorisin Mishnah Zot. He says Yesh mikomot shelo nahagu lomar zot halacha. I wonder, is it because it's such a difficult teaching, because it's such an unusual teaching? If I'm mentioning Kabbalah, there are those who even want to speak about how part of what was being said here had something to do with what they call the transmigration of souls, the Gilgul Neshamot, and they read that into our Mishnah as well. And of course, Gulgolet and Gilgul are very similar words. So I don't think I did justice to the Mishnah, but at least I read through it, and maybe at least Lomar Zot Halacha, I've said it. And if anyone has additional comments and teachings, I would love to hear them. May there never be any skulls floating anywhere. Everyone live happily and healthfully and successfully, and may each person reach the highest level of righteousness, so that no one drowns anyone else, and no one drowns those who drown anyone else. Only bracha and simcha forever and ever. Thank you so much for listening. Shalom.